All right, welcome to some more talk about Stoicism. I got an interesting question on a video about journaling, actually, and that asked me to talk about dealing with grief and change and or fear, which I thought actually all three of those are very interesting topics that you could certainly approach from a more or less stoic viewpoint. So I thought it might be worth to actually do three separate videos on those. We'll see how far we get. Let's start off with grief, and let me start off straight away by saying that I'm not a grief counselor, so I can certainly try to speak to that topic and try to relate it to Stoicism. But if you're really going through serious grief, then seeking out some sort of grief counselor is probably the wisest thing you can do, right? In other words, this video is not meant to be a sort of alternative to therapeutic advice. Okay, but what would you, if you were to ask a Stoic about grief, let's say you would run into Epictetus or a Seneca or Marcus Aurelius, what would they say? I think the first thing that we should consider is understanding that grief is a very human process. It's a very natural part of life. It's a very common process, and I think sometimes people forget that grief can be caused by a lot of different situations. Of course, there is the passing of a loved one. If someone that you love dies, that's likely to evoke a period of grief. But what we overlook sometimes, and sometimes often, is that anything that ends can cause grief. If you have a friendship that ends, or a romantic relationship that ends, or even lose an object, like say a pen that you really love, that could actually evoke a feeling of grief, especially if that, I mean, I'm not talking about a $5 ballpoint, but I'm talking about, is there such a thing? Anyway, I'm talking about something that you really love, that has personal meaning to you, that you end up losing. All of that can, in my mind, be classified as grief. And so in other words, it doesn't necessarily mean that someone has to die for you to experience that feeling or emotion. All kinds of things can evoke grief, and once you accept that, it can become easier to understand that, say, when a friendship ends, the odd feeling that you experience is just a matter of it's grief. That is what you are experiencing. That is what is happening to you, and that is why you feel off. Okay. I think an important way to look at grief and dealing with grief is to first acknowledge that any type of grief you experience will require time to subside. And you can't say, sometimes people ask this of psychologists, how long do you think this process will take me? We don't know. I'm not a clinician, but I mean, speaking of my fellow psychologists, we don't know. That depends on the person, that depends on what has happened, and all kinds of other variables, right? Sometimes grief might take years to heal, and in other times maybe 2 weeks and it's over. There's no right or wrong. It's just a matter of your personal makeup and how you experience things, and I think that's an important thing to always take into account. There's no schedule or known set of steps that if you follow these 5 things, then it will last 3 weeks, and if you do those 6 things, then it will only last 2 weeks or something like that. That doesn't exist, and that means that you need to give yourself time for the feelings of grief that you may experience to subside. And there certainly will be things that can make it easier for those feelings to subside. Seeing a professional would certainly do no harm. talking to friends would certainly do no harm, although friends are not therapists, right? So you do have to be a little cognizant, I think, of what you are burdening friends or family with. And that's another thing that people sometimes forget. You cannot blindly offload all sorts of things forever and ever onto friends and family. Okay, so the time is a factor that just needs to exist. You can't rush certain processes, and you can't rush grief either. This is a maybe somewhat peculiar analogy, but I always think of something like a steak. You can pan fry a steak, but it will take a certain amount of time for that steak to be rare, and then medium, and then well done, and you can't rush that. There is no way to go from a raw, uncooked piece of meat to a well done steak in 30 seconds. It's not possible. No matter what you do, it's not possible. You have to allot it the time that's required to reach that specific cuisson, the way it's cooked, right? And I think a Stoic would also say something like that. If you do need to allot a certain period of time, because you just can't rush certain things. Now, getting more into what Stoics would say, I think people like Epictetus or Marcus Aurelius would say something along the lines of, you must accept certain things. Certain things will happen. You can't do anything about those things. So what is required is a certain level of acceptance. It is certainly hard if you lose a loved one, whether that is through death or, as I said, whether that is through a friendship or relationship ending. It's hard, but it has happened, for better or worse. But it has happened, and let's just take something you can't really debate. Like, you could always have an argument about whether or not a friendship should have ended or not. But let's talk about death. Well, death is certain, right? It's final. There's no two ways about it. And of course, there are different causes of death, which might make things more or less emotional. But I don't really want to get into that. I think a Stoic would say, well, death happens, and even when a friendship ends, it happens. And at that point, if you cannot do anything about it, if reconciliation is not possible, you cannot rekindle that friendship, well, then you have to accept that friendship is gone, or that person has passed away, because they're gone. And that's the end of it, isn't it? Like, there isn't really anything else to discuss. Like, it's a matter of acceptance, and that, again, opening of the Enchiridion by Epictetus. Some things are within your control, some things are not within your control. Someone passing away, provided you've not caused that death, let's work on that premise, right? There's not anything you can do. It has happened. Now, I think that the final thing to remember, and I've had discussions with people in the past about this particular topic, and they found it helpful, and I think this is a central tenet in Stoicism beyond the acceptance, and that is that you are in charge of how you think. You can change your thinking. Even if you cannot change the situation, you are empowered and you are in power, so you can change how you approach something. There is the famous Dr. Seuss line of, don't, and I'm going to butcher this, but don't be sad that it ended, but be happy that it happened. And that is an incredibly wise line that Stoics, I think, would agree with 100%. You can change your thoughts. Instead of focusing on the negative aspects of someone passing away and how sad that makes you, you could also reframe that thinking and say, well, actually, I have all these memories with this person, provided it's a person you had a good relationship with. If you had a terrible relationship with them, I don't know if you'd be particularly sad that they passed away or that the friendship ended or whatever. Provided you had a good relationship with that person, you have those pleasant memories. And I have found too in many different situations in my life that when you focus on that, on the positive things that have happened and not on the negative things, it tends to make things a lot more bearable. And I think that grief is certainly one of those cases where changing your thoughts, I always call that just flipping things, can make a huge difference. If you're able to flip something from I'm devastated that this person has passed away to I'm very sad that this person has passed away, but look at all the wonderful memories I have of the time I've spent with them, right? I think that makes an enormous difference in the way you feel about that whole situation and what you feel and how you feel it. A big difference. And I think that would be very much in line with the Stoics, right? The being able to change your thoughts but not the situation is one of the hallmarks of Stoicism and Stoic philosophy. That's something you can always do. And I always, in those cases, I always remember that the passage it's at the very much the start of the fourth book of the Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, where he quotes Democritus, and he says, "The universe is change, life is opinion." And he also prefaces that by saying, think of all the things you have seen changed, right? You have seen things change. Any type of relationship ending, whether that is because someone dies, because a friendship ends, because a romantic relationship ends, it's all a matter of change, and change is natural. You have changed a lot from the moment you started to watch this video. Just biologically, things have changed in your body that have made you a slightly different person. Think about that, right? A span of about 12 minutes. You've physiologically you have changed, mentally you have changed, things have happened in your brain, you've been listening to this, things have changed. Not to mention the world, the state of the world, the state of the whole universe has changed a bit. And by accepting that there is a continuous change, we can't do anything about it. It just happens. And you can either try to go against that, and things will become very unpleasant, you will be angry, why did he have to die, and like that kind of statement. But at the end of the day, it doesn't make a difference because the person is as dead as they were before you made that statement. Change will happen. It will continue to happen. And you can try to go along with it as best as you can. It's really all you can do. And I find that specific quote is a very powerful one that I find always re-grounds me if I feel that I'm sort of mentally drifting or emotionally drifting and I'm struggling with something. But it's all change. The whole universe is nothing but change. And the final thing I will say is, part of that is also looking ahead. Looking ahead. Where will you be 2 weeks from now, a month from now, a year from now? I remember, this is nothing to do with grief, but I remember having leg surgery when I was younger. I remember lying in bed. I was 14, I think, when I had my first leg surgery. I was lying in bed. I was unable to walk. It was a lengthy recovery process. And it's overwhelming. I mean, you're a fairly young age. You can't walk. It's a lot. And I remember distinctly thinking to myself, but a year from now, I will be able to walk. And that made a huge difference. Like, you project yourself to where you will be then. If you're mourning someone now, there's a good chance that half a year from now, that the pain will have lessened a bit. It may not be gone, but it will have lessened a bit. A year from now, it may be completely different. And that is part of the change as well. Things continue to change. So these are some of the thoughts I had about grief. As always, I'm very interested to hear what you have to say, so by all means leave comments about how you deal with grief. If you think this has been useful, that's good to hear. If you think it's been useless, that's good to hear. But that's what I would say about grief. And I think next we should tackle change and then maybe fear in general. So we'll get back to Seneca at some point, but for now, this is what we'll do. I hope this was useful, and I'll gladly see you later. Bye.